Okay, good morning everyone. It's wonderful to be here and to see all your faces. I'm going to be transparent with you because Women in Neuroscience UK, it's an honest place. I've been on my period, feeling really burnt out all week, so this session is going to be a little bit of a push, but that's what we do. We push through, persevere. And I'm here today to give you a little introduction all about what Women in Neuroscience UK is, how it came about, and then going to be following up by 3 fantastic female neuroscientists talking about their work with sex and gender disparities as well. So let's see if the clicker works. Nope. I'll do it on the screen if possible. Oh, fabulous. Thank you. So now I've been a bit honest, we're going to hear a little bit about you guys as well. Love our sessions to be interactive. So if you have a phone, you can scan the QR code there. You can also enter the code on laptops as well. So don't worry, I won't be asking you guys if you're on your period. Nothing intense like that. All right. Great, seems to be working. So just a little question to check that this is operating correctly. I'd love to hear what career stage you're in at the moment. Great, lots of responses already. Lovely. Fab, lots of PhD students, but people across all career stages, which we always love to have in our audience. And moving on to gender identity. So what best describes you? Female, male, non-binary, other, or prefer not to say? Fab. Okay, great. Lots of women in the audience, but we love to have mixed gender audiences, so thank you to everyone else who's come along as well. Really, really appreciate you being here. Fantastic. And the next question, have you noticed gender bias in neuroscience? We like to start our sessions with this one, and usually it does get a mixture of responses, so please do be honest. This gender bias could be within workplaces or it could be within the research itself. So I'll give you a moment to think about that one. Amazing. Okay, most of you have noticed gender bias, so that means we're doing the right thing by having this session, but equally, there's some of you that have said no and not sure, and that's also important for why we are here, to try and change perceptions a little bit. So thank you very much. Fabulous. So back to me, talking a little bit about why I started Women in Neuroscience UK. So these photos here are quite little embarrassing ones of me in secondary school, sixth form, being so enthusiastic about biology. I was so excited. You've got me there cutting up a kidney and designing some DNA out of sweets, and you can see I'm just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, loving everything about science. And then I moved to Durham University to do my undergraduate degree, and immediately I noticed there was a level of underrepresentation, particularly at senior career stages. I didn't see many lecturers at all that were women, certainly not any professors in my department that were female. And that was a surprise to me as a first-generation student. I didn't really know what to expect. And already at that stage, I was having seeds of doubt planted in my brain, because if you can't see it, can you be it? Of course you can, but you start to question yourself. And then as I've gone on through my neuroscience career, I have encountered gender bias and sexism within the space. I won't go into the details today, but I'm sure every woman in the room has a story to tell regarding these aspects. And on top of that, I experienced a lack of support when going through it, especially during pandemic times where I was in quite male-dominated spaces. When I talked about my experiences, they were often dismissed rather than supported. And that really did have a knock-on on me in terms of my personal mental health, but also on my research itself as well. A lot of imposter syndrome, feeling like I didn't belong in the space, wasn't being listened to. So yeah, it's been difficult. You can see in these photos here, a little bit more dead behind the eyes, a little bit disillusioned with the science space, which is really a shame. And I think in turn that will lead to me leaving neuroscience. I will be moving out of the lab, hopefully, after my PhD is complete. But it's a shame that we're losing people to science because of the culture that we find ourselves in. So that's my story. But what do I think is going wrong more broadly? Because I don't think it's just me that's experiencing this. So I talked a little bit about already sexism, gender bias, underrepresentation. How do I think they're all connected? So I've done some research with Adam Smith at the Dementia Researcher and several other fantastic researchers looking into other people's experiences of sexism in the dementia research workforce specifically. And we found that over 50% of female dementia researchers have experienced sexism at work. So it's still a problem today, absolutely. And that's tied in with gender bias as well. So even myself, gender equality advocate, of course, I have a little part of my brain that still automatically presumes scientists to be old white male, even though looking at this room, I know that's not always the case. We have better diversity now than we have ever before, but there's still more we can do, especially to try and tackle those little brain niggles that might affect how we're interacting day to day with collaborators. It affects who gets funding, it affects who gets promoted, and who gets employed. And that all affects underrepresentation in those senior career stages, unfortunately, both through professional knock-ons and the personal effects that I've talked through already. So Women in Neuroscience UK, what's our approach to kind of tackle this? We have 3 key mission pillars, and we have since the beginning, to inspire, connect, and advocate. And I think it's really important that we have this multi-pronged approach. The advocacy really tackles the issues at their core, the sexism and gender bias, by having sessions like this, just to raise awareness, give people space to talk about their experiences. And that's starting with the individual-led change, but we're also working with organisations now like universities, companies, to try and work towards changing policies within the systems as well. So that's really our dream goal. And then that's not without the individual support that we provide at Women in Neuroscience UK, which I think is really important, because downstream of the sexism and gender bias that we can't always solve immediately, we need to provide people with that day-to-day support that they might not have in their environments that they find themselves in. So our inspiration and connection initiatives are really important for that, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. And what does that lead to? My primary vision through Women in Neuroscience UK is for women to be fairly funded, represented and supported at every career stage. And that also ties into a secondary vision, which is a little bit of a positive knock-on effect, in that we want research to fully reflect diversity of human experience as well. So we're here first to support researchers, but also inclusive research in practice as well. And that's why our talks later will be from female neuroscientists, uplifting their careers, but also allowing them to talk about sex and gender disparities in their research work. So that's really exciting for us. So taking us back to the very beginning of when Women in Neuroscience UK was created, it was back in February 2022, so we've been going for over 3 years now. It's been quite a while. But back at the start, it was just me working alone. I don't know what possessed me, what gave me the confidence to be like, yeah, I'm going to start a company, change the world. But again, I was young and naive. So I built a logo from scratch. It's very kind of primitive, definitely could be improved, but it does its job for now. We have a website. I'd never built a website before, but I went ahead and did it. It has blogs on there, and I also set up our social media across several channels. Because as I said, there wasn't a community for me in person, and looking online, there wasn't anything there either. So I wanted to build that myself. And we held our first event 3 years ago now, and that was with the BNA actually, so it's a nice full circle moment to be here today. And that was a virtual meeting with 4 amazing researchers at different career stages, talking about their experiences in the neuroscience career, with intersections with other areas of discrimination, including ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and ageism as well. I think it's really important to give that overall view. And that event was really well received, and it was then, when I was still running Women in Neuroscience UK independently, individually, that I realised how important it was to keep going with it. So we've grown exponentially since then. We're now 60 volunteers across the UK and further afield as well, because there are so many people that are passionate about this mission. We not only put on virtual events now, but also in person, as you can see, and we conduct original research into those disparities within research culture and in research itself, as well as being really active with digital content across the social media, blogs, newsletters. We cover gender and sex issues in the careers, as I've said, as well as neurological conditions, while trying to platform female researchers throughout to give them that visibility. And so far, we've engaged 6,000 researchers worldwide of different gender identities, different career stages, different neuroscience interests as well. So I'm going to give you a little highlight now of what's coming up for Women in Neuroscience UK in terms of our content, especially if you've not heard of us before, so you can stay tuned with some of the things that you can get involved with. On our stand, if you've not been already, we're at stand 46, and we've got some flyers with our upcoming events on there. I'd like to note that we always want to hear from the community, so if there's an event that you'd like to see, whether that's in a certain location or on a certain topic, do reach out to us, because we're really wanting to uplift your needs and not just what I want to do. So in terms of virtual events, as I've said, these have been going since the beginning. If you've missed these, many of them are on our YouTube channel. And they've covered a range of topics from neurological topics like mental health, dementia, stroke, neurodiversity, but also those career support focused topics, networking sessions, study sessions, female leadership workshops. So our two key upcoming virtual events are our synaptic study session, where we hold each other accountable for whatever work we're doing. So that's virtually online on the 15th of May. Everyone's welcome, it's free. And also a Women in Pain event as well. That's in June, date to be confirmed. We're still looking for a couple of speakers for that. So if you work in pain research, whatever gender you identify with, if you consider women in your work, we would really love to have you as a speaker. So do reach out to us if you're interested in that. Moving on to in-person events. So we launched these last year, and it's been amazing being able to deepen our connections with people in person. And we've been to many cities now across the UK to give talks, which has been really exciting. But I wanted to highlight 3 of our key initiatives that are in person today so that you can learn a bit more about them if you've not heard of them yet. Firstly, Win UK Day. So this is going to be our annual conference, hopefully our first one happening very soon in May. It's going to be based in Nottingham this year with a theme on mental health. So we're looking to adjust the theme year on year to different neurological topics. But we are focusing on talks on mental health research, as well as talking about mental well-being in academia, which is really important. We'll be hosting early career researcher flash talks on different neuroscience topics, as well as having networking opportunities. And it's a completely free event. You don't have to be from the University of Nottingham to attend. Again, you can be any career stage, you can be any gender. We'd really love to have you. So if you're interested in signing up, coming along, do scan the QR code there. Fantastic. The next in-person event topic I'd like to highlight is our unconscious bias in neuroscience workshops. So these have been really successful. So I built these based on the research that I did, as I talked about with Adam Smith and the dementia researcher, using the statistics to really change perceptions on an individual level. So it includes statistics, some interaction with the audience through polling, and ending with really inspiring actions that are simple, that people can take to make changes day to day in their workplaces. So we've been to 4 different cities around the UK with this workshop, and we're really keen to be invited to other institutions to lead this as well, whether that's universities, companies, really keen to reach as many people as we can with this. So do let us know if you're interested in us coming to see you. And the last in-person event topic I wanted to touch on is our Win UK Awards, which is our flagship event year on year. Last year, it was a great success. We held it in Cambridge. We had over 100 nominations for people from 16 different institutions around the UK. And it was a great uplifting event to really celebrate female neuroscientists who haven't historically gotten recognition. But also there are awards that are open to other gender identities as well, which include mentorship, science communication, and also that sex and gender research in neuroscience as well. And I'm really excited to say this is the first time that we're sharing that the nominations are open for this year. So do have a think about who you might want to nominate within your working environment, someone who inspires you and is perhaps under-recognised. We'd really love to celebrate you and the people that you work with. Fantastic. So moving on to our more digital content, we've run the blog since the beginning, and this includes inspirational stories across research, reality, and review topics, We have our resident bloggers in the volunteer team, but we also have guest blogging positions, and these are open to anyone. So if you're interested in kind of building up your science communication portfolio, this is a really great opportunity, particularly for early career researchers. So we welcome pictures on our website. You can scroll down on the blog page and put in some ideas there, and we'll get back to you. We also include some prompts. So if you don't have ideas yourself at the moment, we have prompts in our newsletter that comes out every month. So if there's a topic that you see that's interesting to you, you can get involved through that as well. Social media, of course, we're really active on social media. Many of you might have seen us on social media already. We're across all the different platforms, and we aim to make this a really fun community space where we're not only breaking biases, but providing that inspiring community for neuroscientists. So do follow us at Women in Neuro UK if you don't already. And finally, the newsletter, as I touched on already. This is a monthly email that's sent out with kind of a recap of all the stuff going on, because as you've seen, there's quite a lot of different things. But this summarises all of that, all the key highlights and all the exciting things coming up. So if you're not signed up for that already, you can head to the bottom of our website, stick your email address in there, and hopefully, yeah, looking forward to having you on there. Fantastic. So in terms of impact, I could give you loads of statistics about all of the impact that Women in Neuroscience UK has made, but I think something more compelling is a story from one of our volunteers. So this is Amy, and she let us know that she joined Women in Neuroscience UK because she was a woman in an all-male lab, and she was really struggling to see representations of herself in the space, and that led her to start questioning her abilities. But Women in Neuroscience UK has brought her a sense of belonging. She is able to encourage other women and girls to know that they are more than capable of being in the neuroscience space and that they belong here. And not only that, being a volunteer has built her confidence and skills. She's gained opportunities to speak, to lead. She's even won a Women in Neuroscience UK award herself, gaining visibility for her career through that. She's built an inspiring peer community, which will be really useful to her career. And not only that, it's really interesting to see that it's influenced her research as well. So she approaches her research differently now, having Women in Neuroscience UK's mission in her mind, always looking to design her research projects to be as inclusive as possible. So I think that's fantastic. So where are Women in Neuroscience UK headed next? My priority at the moment has been trying to build as many collaborations as we can, because it's fair to say, as a volunteer organisation that's only just started, we need as much support as we can from everybody. We've had some fantastic sponsors and collaborators so far, and we would really love to be building more connections with new companies, new universities, to broaden the reach of our message as much as possible. It will also give us a chance to make that systemic change that we really want to make by adjusting company policies, university policies to better suit researcher needs. So I'm really excited about this. So if you've got ideas of who we should partner with going forward, do reach out to us via that email there. Fantastic. So to wrap up, I use this title as a bit of clickbait, to be honest. So how one student neuroscientist has advanced diversity, equity and inclusion. I think it's quite clear that I have, but I haven't done it all on my own. Spoiler alert. It's been a massive team effort. So I said I started it myself, but now we're over 60 volunteers across the UK, internationally, and it's a wonderful community to be a part of, with everyone really engaged in that mission. And it not only is beneficial, obviously, to me to have that help, but beneficial to the volunteers as well, building their peer mentorship, skills, career opportunities. So it's really fantastic to be able to work as a team on this. And if you're interested in volunteering for us, we do advertise on social media when new roles come up, so do stay tuned for that. And I wanted to conclude with this. So I want to say, still on. I want to say that your voice matters. So it has been me that started this initiative. And if it wasn't for me being bold in kind of expressing that idea and getting others on board with it, none of this would have happened. So when it comes to science, or whether it comes to people, culture, I think it's important to realise that even if you don't feel included in certain spaces, you do matter, and you can make a real difference. So I'd love to hear how you're going to use your voice today to make a difference as well. So I'll leave you with some of our key links there. Hopefully we'll see you at a conference stand later as well at 46. And we'd really love to hear your ideas and feedback for moving forwards as well. We'll hopefully at the end of the session have a few interactive questions to collect that, but you're also welcome to email me at womeninneuroscience.uk as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Any questions for Lizzie there? Anyone's got any? Don't be shy if there's anything. No? Okay. If there's no questions at all, we'll move on to our next speaker. So I'll come stand up here. A bit easier. Okay, so we're moving on to our next talk now. So next speaker I'd like to invite is Dr. Lysia Dimitriou. And she's a postdoctoral researcher in the pain in women and endocare research groups at the University of Oxford within what is a long title, the Nuffield Department of Women's and Reproductive Health, but a very important organisation. So as a cognitive neuroscience, Dr. Dimitriou's work focuses on how chronic pain affects the brain. She uses advanced imaging techniques and also in-depth data analysis. And she's really doing vital work at this sort of intersection of neuroscience and women's health. So please join me in welcoming her onto the stage.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invite. Just to say that I work in a female-led department in an all-female lab, so things are changing. I do work in the Women's Reproductive Health Department, and as you can tell from the department title, we do a lot of research in women's health, and it ranges from gynecology to neuroscience to genetics to clinical and preclinical work. How do I move on? Oh, okay. I have no conflicts of interest. Okay, so this is not really a talk about sex disparities, but I will outline in my first slide why this is going to be a talk about women's chronic pain. So we know that women are more likely than men to experience all types of chronic pain conditions. And we know that these could be due to differences in female anatomy and physiology, and those give rise to conditions that are unique to women. And that also comes with a distinct set of clinical symptomatology. So by overlooking these conditions and treating everyone as the exact, as same, doesn't sound very good, but by overlooking this uniqueness in female chronic pain, we are increasing the burden that women face across their lifespans. So what we focus on is chronic pelvic pain, and what we know is that pelvic pain is responsible for around 20% of gynecological visits and a significant number of consultations, both with primary care doctors and secondary care and other specialists. So for many years, we thought that this is a chronic pelvic pain mechanisms, that the organ, due to an inflammation such as fibrosis, is sending signals to the brain, and the brain is causing the pain. However, after many years of research, we now know that this model is a lot more complex, and it looks a bit like this. We have different types of pain: neuropathic, nociceptive. We've got different impact of pain, both on clinical symptomatology, mental health, quality of life. We have different reasons for that pain starting. That could be hormonal imbalance, visceral reaction, or lots of different things. So this is our current view of chronic pelvic pain, and we're trying to untangle it to improve both clinical practice but also treatments. And we outlined the current developments in a paper that we recently published in Cell Reports magazine. So our main and biggest project is the translational research in pelvic pain, and we call it the TRIP project. This is an IMI Pain Care EU-funded project in which we collected data from 3 sites, Oxford, Boston, and Portugal. And this project was done in phases. In phase 1, we gave a lot of questionnaires and asked participants almost everything about their medical history, both menstrual and other symptomatology. And we also collected saliva for cortisol analysis and blood for hormonal analysis. Then we gave them additional questionnaires to ask more about their symptoms and other aspects of their lives. And then at a subgroup of those participants, we conducted some physiological testing, which included pain paradigms such as CPM and QST. And finally, a small subset of those participants had an fMRI scan done with a pain paradigm. I'm not going to show all the data here, but I will try to summarize it. So who were our participants? We had 4 pain groups. So we had people with endometriosis-associated pain, which is one of the leading causes of chronic pelvic pain. We had people with both endometriosis and bladder symptoms, people with bladder pain syndrome, and people with pelvic pain without an underlying diagnosis. And then we had a control group that had no pain and no bladder symptoms or anything related to endometriosis. And these are our inclusion and exclusion criteria, and I can go more into them in the Q&A if you're interested. So we published our protocol, and we also published a paper on the results of phase 1, in which we tried to profile our participants and split them by a diagnostic group. And then we try to forget about the clinical diagnosis and see whether we can stratify them using their actual symptomatology and what we see in our data. So when we looked at different types of pelvic pain, so here we have dysmenorrhea, which is pain with period, pelvic pain, which is pelvic pain not related to the menstrual cycle, dyspareunia, which is pain with sexual intercourse, and postcoital pain in the 24 hours following intercourse. And on the y-axis, we have the 4 different patient groups. We don't have the controls here because they don't have pain. And then on the x-axis, we have the pain scales that we gave them to report their pain from 0 to 10. And what we saw is that obviously all our pain groups score high on the pain scales, but it seems like the groups with endometriosis are a bit higher on the first 2 scales. And what we did not really expect to see that so high scores is the dyspareunia scales, so pain with sexual intercourse. And this is something that is not really talked in clinics, or it's not talked by everyone. It's kind of a taboo subject, but it is coming up a lot in our cohort. And so we wanted to look a bit more into this. So we had, as I said, we asked about lots of different things, and what we saw is that more than 55% of the participants in each group reported having experienced pain during or post sexual intercourse. 50% in each group reported having to interrupt or avoid sexual intercourse due to pain in the last 12 months. More than 30% reported having dyspareunia either always or more than half of the times. And when we asked about the location to try and see if there is an anatomical aspect to it, we saw that the responses were varied, and people reported pain at the entrance and also deep in the vagina or the abdomen and pelvis. So these results really highlight why it's so important to ask about everything, and also what we see, because we do research in other countries as well, such as the UAE, and there we know that most women don't even go to the gynecologist before they get married, and even after they do, they only go with their husbands. So we know that there is a big problem there, and by knowing how important such symptoms are, like dyspareunia, we can try and make them part of a clinical diagnosis, or find ways to be able to talk to women about it and also offer them treatment. So then we looked at comorbidities that come with chronic pelvic pain, and we gave participants a long list of disorders and asked them to tell us whether they have ever received diagnosis for these disorders. And what we see here, so again, each color represents a different pain group, and red, the last bar, is for the controls. So what we saw is that more than 10% of the participants in each diagnostic group reported having depression and or anxiety that requires medication or therapy, migraines, asthma, and IBS. IBS we expected, because we know there is a high comorbidity with chronic pelvic pain. It's in the same area. Migraine is something we see coming up more and more lately. It's also a chronic condition, and we are looking more into it. But the very high levels of depression and anxiety is what we didn't expect, and it's what highlights that quality of life and mental well-being is really important for this patient cohort. Then we asked more about their quality of life and living with chronic pelvic pain, and what we saw is that for a lot of people, this pain impacts not only their daily activities, but also their work. And when we used the SF36 scale, we saw that, so here it's the opposite, the higher you are on the scale, the better. So we saw that even for people who their physical functioning even for people who their physical functioning was quite good, their emotional well-being was lower on the scale. So then we moved on into exploring fatigue. And when we say fatigue, we don't just mean being tired after a long day. We define fatigue as a multifactorial concept that comprises both biophysiological and a psychological component. And it's usually characterized by physical and mental exhaustion, even though it doesn't present with the same symptoms in everyone. But what is consistent is that this exhaustion cannot be relieved by stress. So we wanted to explore whether there are associations between this primary fatigue by using the Neuroquality of Life fatigue scale and our other measures of pain and quality of life. And then we wanted to explore whether this fatigue can be explained by pain or by mental well-being factors, and we used a structural equation modeling for that. So here we have the results on the fatigue scale. The blue line represents the clinical cutoff for fatigue. So you can see that this is our control group that falls under the line, but everyone else falls above the clinical cutoff for fatigue. So more than 80% of our patients scored above the cutoff. And at first we thought that there might be a high comorbidity with fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, but actually that wasn't the case. Only very, very few people had a diagnosis of those. So then we correlated their fatigue with all the other measures that we had: sleep, depression, anxiety, pain catastrophizing, other fatigue measures, all the pelvic pain and bladder symptoms, pain during a gynecological exam, and widespread pain, how neuropathic their pain was, and emotional well-being. And as you can see by the stars here, they all come up very significantly correlated with this fatigue. And we also ruled out the effect of different drug treatments that they might be taking and having fatigue as a side effect. But the drugs didn't explain any of these results. Also, we didn't find a correlation between nocturia and fatigue because we did have a lot of participants with bladder symptoms, so we thought that could be leading to the fatigue, but there was no correlation between the two. And also, more than 45% of our participants reported experiencing persistent fatigue not relieved by rest for at least 3 months during the last year. And about 20% of our participants reported experiencing impaired memory, concentration, or attention, which are also standard symptoms of fatigue. So then we moved into our model, and we had our pain measures, fatigue measure, and psychological well-being measure. And each factor, we defined each factor using different scales. I can't use this thing properly. Yeah. And you can see them here. And then when we ran the analysis, what was very interesting is that it turned out that the pain justifies more than 90% of the fatigue symptoms, and only less than 90%, about 10%, is explained by the psychological well-being. So we are rethinking about how the model, the interactions between these three actually are working. So it's not that the pain causes it looks like it's not the pain causes the reduced well-being, and then that causes the fatigue. It seems to be separate to the psychological well-being, and it could be the fatigue that is feeding back into the psychological well-being, but we need to do more analysis to untangle this. How am I doing with time? Okay, good. So then we moved into doing an integrative analysis to try and combine all the different data that we had to see whether we can re-stratify these patients. So first, at the first stage, we compared them to the controls, and then we ran a latent profile analysis to see if we can see patterns that are not dependent on their clinical diagnosis. So again, these are control groups. So now in stage 1, we grouped all the patients together, and in stage 2, we dropped the controls and we just focus on stratifying the patients. So just a summary of what we saw in stage 1. We saw significant differences between the patients and the controls in all of our questionnaire measures: fatigue, sleep, depression, anxiety, also gastrointestinal symptoms, all the pain scales, pain catastrophizing. We also asked about childhood and recent trauma, and the reason we used those scales is because there have been evidence that endometriosis is associated to childhood or recent trauma. And by that, I don't mean just sexual trauma. It's more about psychological trauma in general. What we haven't seen that was very interesting is differences in our physiological measures. So in our ECG, cortisol profiles, the pain paradigms that we used, and in a personality scale that we've used. So then we took all the data and we selected 22 measures that we fed into our model and asked it to see if it can create clusters and of patients that present differently based on this. And what we got is 3 clusters. And then when we checked whether there was one group that fell into one cluster and then another group that fell into the other cluster, it was very interesting that we saw that clinical diagnosis doesn't actually matter when it comes to symptomatology, because we had a good spread of each different group in each cluster. Like all the endometriosis people are not clustered in one cluster. So when we looked a bit more into how each cluster looks, we saw that cluster 1, so here we have a cluster on the x-axis and the different scores on the y-axis, and you can see that the first box plot is always higher. So and it's the same across most measures, except, as I said, the physiological ones. So the ECG doesn't follow the same pattern, but basically that led us to define these 3 clusters as high symptom burden, moderate symptom burden, and low symptom burden. And then when we looked at the data that we didn't use to define these clusters, we saw that there are also significant differences in those, and they present themselves in the same way. So cluster 1 seems to be higher, significantly higher in most measures that include both pain and quality of life. And so coming to a conclusion now, what we can tell from this data is that in chronic pelvic pain, we have lots of different patients that come from many, many different backgrounds. And due to their backgrounds or not, they seem to have a different symptomatology, and they don't all present in the same way, and they don't all have the same needs. So the reason we're trying to do this stratification is to move away from the standard clinical diagnosis, which currently does not offer any treatment that can work for everyone, and see whether we can be a bit more to give a bit more personalized approach to what can be done to help each patient. So that's our conclusion from this study. Thank you.
Okay, we're taking questions from the audience. Sorry, I'm not sure if this works, but we're taking questions from the audience, if anyone's got any.
Sorry, I just want to thank everyone that is part of this project and my supervisor, Professor Katie Vincent. Thank you.
Any questions at all? No? Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you had a look at the effect of getting a diagnosis on the psychological well-being in that kind of thing. Because lots of these conditions are very long-term, they're often misdiagnosed and cross over the band. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. In this specific project, no, because everyone already had a diagnosis to be included in our cohort. But we know that one of the biggest issues in chronic pelvic pain is that the average, at least for endometriosis, the average time to get a diagnosis is 7 years, which it will affect your mental well-being. And that's unavoidable, but that's one of the reasons that we're trying to do this, to see if there is a better way to get to a diagnosis, or even even when you don't have a diagnosis, if you can actually treat the pain, that actually helps. Yeah, but yeah, very good comment. Thank you.
Over there, yeah.
It's interesting for the control groups, like almost 50% of the controls had fatigue.
Yeah.
Were you surprised about that? Whether you did a longitudinal or can do a longitudinal, does that lead to?
Yeah, that was also interesting. I mean, a lot of the controls also have anxiety and depression. So the way we selected them is that they don't have any chronic pain, but they're normal people that could have lots of other things going on. But fatigue is something that from other studies we see that it has increased after COVID. I don't have the data now, but it's something that we see in the general population increasing, and it could be related to specific conditions that they may have, or it could just be unexplained. Yeah.
If no one else has a question, I have a quick one as well.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, you kind of highlighted about women in the UAE and things like that. How much did you find that culture was an impact? You obviously had cohorts from a few different countries.
Yeah, so the specific data that I presented, it was all Europe, UK, and US. But the other studies that are being done in the department, I mean, we know that culture plays a role. It's very difficult to assess it because even the questionnaires that we give are not the same as we give to people, because even women in those countries are not used to being asked about these things. Or even if you ask them, very often they don't even have the language to convey the same things. So it is a big challenge how to make research more accessible, and yeah, that is.
If we can thank Lucia again.
Fantastic talk. Thank you, Dr. Dimitriou. So moving on now to our next speaker, which will be Dr. Elizabeth Williams, a senior lecturer in the Sports and Exercise Sciences Division at Swansea University. And yes, you heard that right, another Elizabeth, not two Johns, two Daves in this session. We've got two Lizzies, so love that. Dr. Elizabeth Williams' research looks at advancing our understanding of head impact in contact sports with a particular focus on female athletes, a population that have been too often overlooked in this area of research. So I'm really happy to welcome her to the stage and hear more about this.
Thanks so much. Well, these are two very, very, very hard acts to follow. So just to bring the expectation down a little, I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm not going to pretend to be a neuroscientist. There is one neuroscience slide that I'm going to skip over. So please no questions on that. But yes, so I've called this talk Equal Play, Equal Protection, because there really isn't any in the big wide world of sports. So what we've been doing at Swansea University over the last 8 years, I only came here for 2, but they say Swansea is the graveyard of ambition, so once you go there you'll never leave, and I was like, no, but 9 years nearly. Here we are. So in those 9 years, how do you, where do I? Cool. Okay. So over that time period, we've been researching mainly head impact biomechanics in rugby, because Wales rugby, and mainly in men, because that's where the funding is. So also in that time period, the participation rates globally for women and girls in rugby, in soccer or football, whatever you'd like to call it here, where you kick the round ball, and all the other different sporting codes along those lines have grown exponentially. So now around 1/3 of registered or currently playing rugby players in the world are female. So these photos, obviously when New Zealand won the World Cup in Auckland, I was there on the sideline. Go New Zealand against England. Remember that, guys? What's it called? Eden Park, which is the hallowed grounds of New Zealand sports, was sold out. A year earlier, they were debating whether or not they could hold the World Cup final at Eden Park because they wouldn't be able to afford it to sell the tickets. So we've had exponential growth across the globe of females participating in traditionally male sports. And we haven't had the same increase in research effort to understand differences between injuries across the board. So head injuries is what I'm going to talk about in that time. So just one slide this is how I'm going to, so I just want to differentiate for the purposes of this talk, because I'm not sure quite where we're at with what's legal and what's not in what countries. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to talk about sex differences, which are the biological differences between males and females. And I know this isn't totally kosher at the moment. Not sure like politically if I'm allowed to say this, but we're in the UK, not the US, so I think we should be fine. So sex being biological happens in humans, animals, cells. That's when I'm talking about sex differences, that's what I mean. When I talk about gender differences, I'm talking more the social constructs. So for the purpose of this talk, I'm talking about resourcing, I'm talking about opportunities, I'm talking about equipment, playing fields, as in like physical, actual playing fields and the quality of those. So this is unique to humans, can change over time, multifaceted and complex, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Moving on. So, right, now when we're talking about sex and gender and brain injury risk, there's a whole lot of sex differences that affect how it happens and the outcomes from those. So the biomechanics, which is mainly what I'm going to talk about, I'm trying to stay in my lane. There's also, we have to consider the physiology, differences in neuroanatomy, hormones, which I'm briefly going to touch on, but again, outside my lane. Neuropsych issues, our mental health issues. These things, sex-specific, that will affect how females sustain brain injuries, how they present with brain injuries, and how they recover from brain injuries. Is also the compounding factors of gender and culture around brain injury. So first of all, if you're talking about sports teams, the availability of medical expertise. So just so you know, our current university women's first rugby team has no medic. No pre-season scat tests, no follow-ups, nothing. And these girls get their heads kicked in weekly. They tell me about it, but I can't do anything about it. So when I've tried to get them a medic last year, it worked. This year it didn't. So our men's team have to, full-time with them. So, I mean, that's not unique to Swansea University. So that's a big issue, availability of medical expertise. There's a US study I can talk about later if you're interested that found that medical expertise, if that was parallel, the differences in recovery trajectory are quite similar. But resourcing and education, same kind of thing. So societal norms and perceptions around brain injury. So when a lot of the concussion guidelines are based on how males would typically respond to it. So the disorientation, quite often anger and stuff. But if a female might have completely different presentations, maybe a lot of emotional, maybe a lot of crying, like what the hell's wrong with you? Come on, get back on the field. Because she knows where she is, she knows what day it is, and she can count to 10. She doesn't have a brain injury, but she's crying, she's upset. So, but that's not in the sideline concussion guidelines. So. And then I've just put gender-based violence and abuse there. I can't remember why I put that there and why I didn't take it out for this talk, because I'm not going to talk about that today. But it's a thing. So just a bit of background. So some of these studies most of these are from the vehicle accident literature. So female occupants being 1.5 times more likely to suffer a concussion, whatever that dirty C word means these days, in frontal vehicle crashes than males. So this is belted in the front seat or driver's seat or passenger seat. 2.6 times, but I reckon it's higher than that, more likely to suffer a concussion, but that's just, it's only recorded if it's recognised and diagnosed, right? It's all different. I could talk about the differences in different levels, different age groups, different sports. And our research and also a big study by Abigail Bretson and colleagues in the States have found different head impact mechanisms in soccer/football, round ball game, and with us in rugby. So I'm going to talk a bit more about that, the rugby. So just bear in mind that when you're analysing a video to look for head impact, like head injury, brain injury mechanisms, head to ground contact is on the second page in the small print halfway down in the rugby consensus. Just remember that when I talk about how most of our females at the lower levels get their head impacts. So you guys will know far more about this part than I do. So I'm just quoting other people's studies there. So studies have reported females to be more cognitively impaired than males following a diagnosed, recognised, we'll call it a concussion, I don't know how you guys feel about that word, but it's a bit controversial, a bit scared about using the word concussion. What is a concussion anyway? Experience greater objective and subjective concussive effects, more on that later. Worse visual and combined memory function scores. So that study, Tracy Covison, she's not here, is she? Are you here? No? Okay. Did amazing work in America. Same group as the study I mentioned before with the soccer head impact mechanisms. Oh, did I mean to do that? Yes, no, I did. Okay, now this is the slide I was going to take out, but I've left it in. So there's probably, just at a very basic level, studies have reported females to have smaller axons, so smaller cross-sectional area with fewer microtubules than males. This is a 2018 study. So what's interesting here, and how this has been explained to me in very simple language by somebody who knows what they're talking about, is imagining a male axon as like a 10-lane highway. And if you have an accident in one lane, you've got a lot more lanes to divert the traffic. And the female axon being like a dual carriageway, so if you have an accident in one lane, the traffic's going to be backed up for a long time. So that's how it was explained to me. Am I kind of on the right track there? Yeah, you reckon? Okay, good. Okay, we'll go with that. So the upshot is that if you have a similar magnitude head impact, a female brain may not fare so well. And then we have hormones. Yes, we do. So research has shown, very little research, because there's not much on it, because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to get funding to do this. I've just got, last 2 years ago, menstrual cycle monitoring was one of the main factors of a study that I'm going to tell you about at the end, and one of the conditions of getting the funding was to take that out in a study of 90 females. You heard that correct. So higher odds of having post-concussion syndrome, and again, wording, we'll just call it that for now. I'm very aware that there's lots of nuances and things that you can't say about that. And that progesterone, again, outside my lane, forgive me if I get this a bit wrong, progesterone having potent neuroprotective properties, which is higher in the luteal phase of your cycle, which would be there. So this would be progesterone, very oversimplified diagram, I know. And this 2014 study has shown more significant post-concussion symptoms if you have your concussion here, right? So when your progesterone's higher, so you have your injury, a few days later your progesterone tanks, everything, your whole world falls apart. People say, what the hell is wrong with you? You say, I don't know. And then you go, actually, you did get a big bang on the head the other day. I wonder if that's got anything to do with it. What I don't know, and what we wanted to find out in that study, but weren't allowed, is what happens if you have your concussion here. And then the standard it was, when we started that study, 12-day return to play test. What if you have that 12-day return to play test? Or it's 21 days now, so that would be about right. So if you have your 21-day return to play here, and you pass, but then 3 days later, when your progesterone tanks again, would you still pass? I don't know. We're not allowed to study it. I will, but I just don't have the funding to do it. Yeah, I mean, I'll get somebody who knows what, obviously, I have people on my team who are experts in this. I'm not one of them. Anyway, we don't know. So it's another thing. So are you okay to just blindly apply the post-concussion return to play protocol, which is based on male, usually professional athletes, to women, females? Are you? Doesn't really work for a lot of the girls I work with. Okay, so there's that. Now we'll move on to the biomechanical part. So right back to the last 20 years, researchers in different fields, not relating to sport, have found and reported significant head and geometry differences, sex difference between head and neck geometry and neck strength. Neck strength. Do you understand what I mean, neck strength? I'm trying to say it like a British person, I'm really failing. Neck strength. Now my students are like, who's neck? I'm like, what? Neck strength. The strength of the thing between your head and your shoulders. That can't be scaled from male. So if you think crash test dummies, the hybrid 3s, when they first developed the female one, it was like a 5th percentile dummy, and the neck was just, they just made it smaller than the male. They just kept everything the same and just made it smaller, put lipstick on it, plastic boobs. That was it. Seriously. And so, I mean, the biofidelity of those ones was pretty bad anyway. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago, so I heard this at an Okobe conference the year before last, that the new female Thor dummies were a lot more biofidelic, but the neck part of the dummy was still the thing that was lacking. Like they still couldn't model the female cervical spine, we'll call it, properly. So you can't scale it. There's so many physical differences, different size vertebrae, different intervertebral coupling between one vertebrae and the other. So this increases the susceptibility to whiplash and obviously resulting injuries to the brain. So these dimorphisms in the anatomy of your C-spine has been in this STEMPA study. They've done a lot of work, these guys. linked to their higher mortality rate, like 17% more likely to die, I think, females are than males in a car crash. A lot of it is linked to the differences in the stability. So ultimately, the male C-spine is way better at resisting these inertial forces. So if you think about a car crash, think about that same thing applied to a rugby field. So somebody gets tackled in rugby, a male neck, because, especially the rugby players, they're out to here, they're not going to go anywhere. Typically female neck, you're going to have this. So a lot of that non-contact, so because they didn't get hit in the head, could mean to somebody who was not too, new to the medic, that they didn't have a brain injury. So greater intervertebral coupling and stability in male necks. So most of the work I've been doing is on rugby. I really wanted to include more cycling in this because we've just done a study on track cycling and found pretty much the same thing, but I couldn't get the videos to load, so we're talking about rugby. So rugby has massive problems with not just concussion, but right now there's that lawsuit. I think 900 former players now are suing the various federations for medical negligence, saying rugby's safe. These guys in their 40s who have been diagnosed with early dementia. How am I going for time? Sorry, my watch is totally flat. I forgot my watch charger. Let me know. So a New Zealand study from 2017, because every New Zealander has to play rugby, so 75% of the male community and 85% of the elite players, or elite club level included in that, have experienced at least one brain injury. And quite a few studies, New Zealand, Australia, New Zealand, States and UK are these ones, that have associated, many since then actually, associated that repeat head impacts, not necessarily a concussion, with these neurodegenerative diseases in retired players. So if you remember the movie Concussion with Will Smith, with the American football players. So we did wonder how long it was going to take for rugby to catch up, and sure enough, here we are, 2025, you still have national federations saying, what problem with brain injuries? So there's far less data for the women's game, surprise, surprise, despite women now accounting for a third of the global playing population. So as far as the women's game goes, particularly at the lower levels where there's more people, this lack of data on females and lack of research is a big problem for the health and safety of female players. And it's the same for vehicle testing and medicine in general. So just talking about sex and gender differences in the rugby union context and why this is such a problem. So if you think about those dimorphisms in the C-spine, and that the majority of the injury prevention and identification frameworks are based on male-only data. We still, not like we, but people still generalise the data derived from males to females without really giving it a whole lot of thought. So we need female-specific data to develop more targeted, more appropriate injury prevention protocols and post-injury follow-up protocols. So return-to-play protocols need to include a lot more things than they do now that are specific to female bodies. So both sex differences and gender differences contribute to this, because obviously with the sex differences, you've got all the things that we already know. With the gender differences, you've got, say, fully funded teams versus no funding teams, teams that have a full-time medic, teams that don't have a medic, etc. All the equipment used in rugby, ball size, everything based on male data. All the training equipment, so tackle shields, they're all based on bigger people. How much does that affect it? We don't really know because we don't have funding to study it. Obviously, rugby is a very, very male-dominated game historically. So the men's game was professionalised in 1995 after South Africa beat New Zealand in the World Cup final. Since then, the game's exploded, so of the size of the players, so of the strength and speed of the players and the intensity of the head collisions. The women's game is currently being professionalised with England, France, New Zealand, Canada now having, and Wales as of last year, but having full-time contracts, but they don't get paid nearly. They still have to have a second job, so it's not really professional. So training methods are improving, but we need to do better. So what we've tried to do is tried to speed this along. So this is a 2021 paper that we published from Swansea, where we tested the neck strength of a whole lot of male and female university players. So the guy in the picture is not one of them. He was a Lion Welsh national front row whose neck is something else. Yeah, he bent the bottom bracket after we'd figured out I was like, if I stood on it, that bottom bracket wouldn't bend. He did that with his head. So now we have an 8 mil thick bottom bracket. So anyway, yeah, so you can see here the boxes, the top boxes, the lighter coloured ones are male forwards and male backs. And this is neck strength, so flexion, forwards, extension, backwards, right and then left lateral flexion that we've measured on this wonderful machine that we've built in our garage. We've now got like 12 of them all around the UK. And the darker boxes are female forwards and female backs. There's a couple of interesting things here. It's not relative to body weight, this is just absolute. But you can see there's quite a lot of difference between the male forwards and the male backs, but not a whole lot of difference in flexion anyway between the female forwards and the female backs. So a lot of the females had only been playing for an average of 3.5 years. And the males, the same age, same demographic, everything else similar, same sort of areas of wherever they came from, they've been playing for an average of 13.5 years. So we were thinking, we can do a nice sex differences study, and the coaches were all saying, we're about equality. We're going to do the same training. And 2 weeks in, I was like, no, that's a really, really bad idea. You're talking about a team of really novices versus a team of semi-professionals. You can't do that. So you can't really study sex differences when you've got that massive gender gap there. So anyway, what we found in that study was no significant difference. So I should backtrack a little bit. These are electronic mouth guards that we've developed. Well, we've developed one in Swansea, but we used a different one for this. So the mouth guard is stuck to the player's teeth, really tightly coupled, and they contain an accelerometer, a little IMU, little accelerometer gyroscope magnetometer, which will measure the intensity of the head impact, so linear acceleration, this way, and that way, and rotational, so pitch, yaw, and roll, and it will tell us what the peak of that acceleration is for both linear and rotational acceleration. So we didn't have any significant differences, nothing to write home about, between males and females in this, and we should have. The females were around 30% lighter, and they just hadn't been playing that long, right? So if you didn't take a step further and look at how these were happening, you'd say, no, there's no differences, which is what one other study, there's not plenty of research on this, has done before. So have a look at this. So it's not until you kind of go, actually, so grey being females, blue being males, these are the impact mechanisms, so indirect, when you don't actually hit your head. Direct contact with a hard body part, so that could be somebody else's head, their knee, their whatever's, direct contact with a soft body part, stomach usually, and direct contact with the ground. Now, I'm going to keep coming back to this, direct contact with the ground, because like I said earlier, halfway down the second page in small print of the consensus on what to look for brain injuries in rugby. So this picture here shows a woman who had been playing rugby for 9 years, but never had expert coaching in that time. Textbook tackle, so now World Rugby has lowered the tackle height to make the game safer for men. So this is a textbook lower tackle. She fell to the ground, and I'll show you a video soon of what happened to her head. It looked a bit like this. So have a look at the Welsh fullback. I'm going to do that a few times. So you can see, just before, so this woman here, Kaylee Powell, and I keep apologising to her every time I make her do this again and again. She comes in, so this is right before lockdown, and this is before the Welsh team had professional contracts, so before they were doing any neck strength. Am I going for it? Okay, for time? Am I? Okay, so have a look at this girl here. So she comes in, and just there, she smacks her chin on the Italian shoulder, and then she falls to the ground and hits her head on the ground. So head to ground wasn't then recognised as being a problem that we should look for. She played on for 5 minutes after that, before she was pulled off because she had no idea where she was. She was offside and she was just not in a good space. So that mechanism is what we see every game for the university women. That was a national team, so that was, now that they know more about it, we're seeing less and less of that at the top level of the women's game, but we're still seeing it every game in the university level. So this is professional men, this is an international. Have a look at this guy's head. See how it doesn't touch the ground? It's just like a solid, that's normal. This is university men. See that guy's head there? Head? Doesn't touch the ground. This is Ireland, Scotland before any of them had professional contracts. See the Scottish player here? See what's happening to her head? Whiplash head to ground. And then I have a video of that. This is what I was. Have a look at the ball carrier. So textbook tackle, that's what they want now. See her head? So it wasn't until we started using these electronic mouth guards that we started measuring how hard those impacts to the ground were, and they were way higher than anything that we recorded in the male game. Male's bigger, stronger, harder, faster. So the upshot of that study, this was a kind of pilot study in 2021, was that the findings don't support the generalisation of male-derived injury prevention data to female athletes. We didn't find statistical differences between the magnitude of the impacts, but we found massive mechanistic differences between how those impacts happen. So direct head-to-ground impacts have 26% of the women and less than 10% of the guys, with whiplash, as in that really hard drive to the ground, happening in 78% of the female ones and one of the male ones. And that one was only because the guy, he was not that much younger than me. He was playing for the uni team because he was enrolled in the teaching course. He hadn't played for a long time. He came on for the last 5 minutes as a prop and fell over backwards and smacked his head on the ground. And that's the only reason we have one whiplash head to ground in that data set. So yes, the good news is that World Rugby read it and went, okay, cool, we've got to do something about it. So they've developed this contact confidence, so mobility, rolling, falling and landing, deep neck stabilisation, neck strengthening, head reaction, set of guidelines that coaches, this is all the resources on the World Rugby website, and based on, here we go, Williams et al. 2021, yes. So they're listening. So then they gave us funding without the menstrual cycle stuff to do this study, but we weren't allowed to do that, and we weren't allowed to do, we had focus groups in there too, we weren't allowed to do that either. So we've just finished the study, we're just writing it up now, so I'll just quickly show you what we found. So this is meant to be a woman playing rugby, AI generated. So she's not holding, if anyone plays rugby, she's not holding the ball very well, but I couldn't change the pictures. So we had 7 contact zones that we found in that study, that we've used in that study. So zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5, 6, and 7. Now, just so you know, this red line here is the base of the sternum, which is now, in the UK, the maximum legal tackle contact height for grassroots rugby. Grassroots including all bucks, all club, anything that you don't get paid for. So all women's rugby. So this graph shows how many of the total tackles that we've included in the study, how many were in which zone. So most were in zone 3, which is higher than the legal tackle height, right? Did anyone get penalised for that? Not really. So, okay, so the high tackles to zone 1 and 2, mostly zone 2. You can't really see this from here, but the highest was always the direct head to ground. So here we've got direct to hard body part, direct to soft body part, indirect and direct head to ground. Head to ground being, but that was only just about 18 G, I think, G-force. I'm just using the linear acceleration values because the rotation, we could be here all day. So medium contact zones, similar thing, so head to ground being the highest, but again, not really, actually that's a 20, I can't tell what that is. About 17 G, but now the new rules are that you have to tackle, below that red line. So that works if you know how to fall, and that works if you've got a really solid, strong neck. It doesn't really work if you don't. So if you can see this value here, direct head to ground, this is nearly 25 G average, 25 times 9.81 metres per second. So this is when the person was tackled, usually, well, pretty much always the ball carrier will get tackled in these low zones, which is what the textbooks say you have to do now, and that, just like you saw the Swansea girl tackled low, fell. If you get tackled lower, it's an effectively longer lever arm between your point of contact and your head, right? You fall to the ground, your head impact to the ground is going to be way higher, and that's exactly what we've seen. But now, this is the tackle high. I'm not saying you should tackle higher because that's bad too, but I'm just saying we need to think about this some more. So yeah, here. This is by far the highest magnitude impacts. So anyway, just moving on, because I know I'm probably over the 20 minutes. We're trying to progress this. My PhD student, David, he's actually now graduated, he published this. So creating a head acceleration and a machine learning model to recognise from the head acceleration profiles from the mouthguard what was direct, what was indirect, characterise it, break it down a bit more. So he did really well there. And what we really need to do, what we're trying to do, we're a bit hamstrung with the funding, is develop minimum standards or international standards for video analysis that include females, that include the women's game, because the current ones are based on 15 professional men's teams and 3 under-18 academy boys teams. We need to develop international minimum quality standards for recording and reporting of head impact data, and that is progressing, which is good. Now, World Rugby has mandated electronic mouthguards in all of the national and professional games. So the data is now coming in thick and fast, and I'm just avoiding everything to do with it now. We need to continue to highlight the significance of the role of the team, the role of the player support in projects like this. So we can't collect data from athletes without the gatekeepers, the coaches and the managers actually letting us collect the data. And what I'm doing now, and I keep saying I'm writing it up, I've been writing it for a long time, I haven't finished it yet, is doing this in different sports. So we just did a track cycling and BMX study. It was just video analysis. But in sprinters, I can tell you the statistics, this is what I remember, 80% of the female sprint athletes, the track cycling sprinters, who crashed had that massive whiplash head to ground, and 20% of the males did. And I've got footage of these male international sprinters crashing at 70k an hour with their heads going nowhere near the ground, like a metre away, like a cat. And every single female hits the ground. The only one that didn't in that cohort was she. I know her, I used to race her. She got pushed up the track, hit the rail, and then slid all the way down. It's the only reason she didn't hit her head on the ground. So food for thought. And that's that. So I had a lot of help with this. And if you want to contact me, that's my email. I've gotten off Twitter because of Elon Musk. But one thing I just did want to shout out to Catherine Stedeker, who I'm filling in for now. So she was the one who was invited to speak here, but she can't make it here. She's in. But Pink Concussions, please look that up, because Pink Concussions, Catherine started this as a non-profit worldwide organisation to advocate for and provide support for females who have had brain injuries who don't fit the classic brain injury profile that's in all the books. So she's now in, I don't know how many countries, like hundreds of thousands of people have been involved. She's got Facebook groups, support groups, who get 10, 15 posts a day, and for some of those women in the States, particularly at the moment, Pink Concussions is like their only source of unbiased, somewhat factual information, peer support information, because you can't have sex differences in concussion in the States right now. You're not allowed to talk about it. I would be concerned about her giving a talk like this and then going back to the States right now. So, yeah. Thank you. Sure.
Rugby is my sport as well, so you quite right with the women's rugby, it's going through the roof. I guess the question is, it's getting more and more popular, but your data is really clear. So how, I guess, does something have to come into training? I mean, just interested, how do you, in training or anything, to try and combat that? Yeah.
So that contact confident is really good. So if people do that, like use that as warm-up protocols, and player awareness, like teaching players, like, this is bad, don't do it. We've developed these neck strengthening protocols, like with our rigs, but we've only got them in like Swansea, Exeter, Leeds. We can make more, but so testing that neck strength, and if they've got deficits, that's been really, really effective. So if you get clotheslined, hurt your shoulder, you have your shoulder rehab, but not your neck. So you might have, your profile might be, strong for flexion, strong for extension, left flexion, but right flexion. So that wouldn't be picked up. Then you go on and play, and you'd, So those kinds of things are really effective, but like just generally learning how to fall and learning how to tense your neck, like make as many chins as possible, which they don't want to do.
It's just interesting in the point of the cycling, you look at male track sprinters, they're built like rugby players.
Yes, I know.
That's probably the same difference, isn't it?
Yeah. And the females, I mean, I was a female track sprinter. I mean, it's going back quite a long time now, clearly. But it was never even talked about that, you know, I'd have a concussion and I'd be off for 6 months. The boys in my squad would have a concussion and be back the next week. Like, what's wrong with you? You know, like, we just didn't know. I didn't know. And it makes so much sense now that all the girls tended to do that. Just didn't know how to fall, just fell like a sack of spuds and smacked their heads on the ground. Fun times.
Great.
Oh.
Amazing talk, thank you. Great to see the data making real-world impact as well. So moving on to our final speaker now, we've got Ella Abken, who is a research assistant with the Cure ME team at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, where she focuses her research on chronic fatigue syndrome. And today she'll be talking about sex differences in neurological conditions, including Alzheimer's disease, as well as ME/CSF. Sorry, said that wrong, CSF, you know what I am. Neuroscience conference, too many neuroscience terms. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear from Ella, so please do come and speak. Thank you.
Yes, I'm in my early research, so please bear with me here. I want to speak today about the high prevalence in neurological diseases, speaking of, have a high prevalence in different sex. When we are looking now at maybe a snapshot of, I don't know how it works, a snapshot of the prevalence of neurological diseases. We can see here, when we just look here on the right side, that autism is showing that it's 4 times more likely for men to develop Alzheimer's compared to women. But when we are looking at Alzheimer's, we see that women are 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer's. But these are really common neurological diseases. When we are speaking about maybe a rare neurological disease called ME/CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome, we see that it's 4 times more likely for women to develop ME/CFS. I think I will spend maybe 1 minute to talk about ME/CFS, just to give you an idea what ME/CFS is. So ME/CFS is a chronic fatigue syndrome, as I said, and it's a rare disease, but in the UK, 400,000 people are suffering from this disease. We don't have any biomarker for this disease, so it's really difficult to give you a diagnosis. On the other hand, the people are suffering from extreme symptoms. We're speaking about pain, we're speaking about you're really sensitive to light and noise. It's so difficult for them to even speak, to eat, to get out of bed. So when you're really in these severe cases, you're bedbound. You can't even eat yourself, you need someone around you 24/7. But when you want to get a diagnosis, everyone is saying, well, it's just in your head. Like, I don't see that you are sick. And I think this is the worst part of this disease. And I want to use like ME/CFS as well as Alzheimer's as a case study here in this talk to explore maybe biological factors as well as sociological factors to see how they influence sex differences in the prevalence in these diseases. Okay. I want to start our exploration with the structure of the brain. So we know that women have a smaller brain than men, but it's not about the intelligence. It's just that the brain size is going along with the height of people or the height of animals. So when you just look at animals, a whale has a much bigger brain as a human, but maybe they're not more intelligent. So it's really going with the height. So we can say that the woman who is taller than a man has a bigger brain compared to the man. We can look at other differences in the brain. We see that the woman has a thicker cortex, and we can also see that women have a smaller ventricle. Like ventricle are these holes in the brain which have liquid in it. But now I want to look at the structure of the brain with the lens of the case study Alzheimer. So we know when we develop Alzheimer that the brain, the brain shrinks. But what actually shrinks in the brain is the proportion of gray matter. Women have a higher proportion of gray matter compared to men. However, in Alzheimer, the proportion of gray matter rapidly shrinks in women. However, you know that gray matter is connected with memory, with speaking, with all your cognitive function. But we see in Alzheimer that women are still having this cognitive function when they develop the symptoms way longer than men. Maybe one reason could be that women using two hemispheres in the brain compared to men who are using most of the time one hemisphere. It's just a thought about it. When we are looking now at the white matter, which is changing in Alzheimer as well, we know only from the structure of the brain that we have a low proportion of white matter in women compared to men. Studies are showing that we have changes more, like you can see more the changes in the white matter in the woman compared to men. We can talk longer and longer about the differences in the brain, but what I really want to say is that when we are looking at diseases, we know that we start in the brain maybe with a different structure when you look at female and male brains. Okay. I want to spend a little bit of time to speak about Alzheimer. As I said, women are 2 times more likely to develop Alzheimer compared to men. But what we are thinking of in my group, like I'm a scientific collaborator with the Women's Brain Foundation, and what we are asking us was like, okay, what is happening with the diagnostic of Alzheimer? So when you're a patient and you're going to get your diagnostic, you're getting a dementia score. And this score is really important because it's telling you in which stage of dementia or Alzheimer you are in. So they're using people like informant, maybe it's your mother, your husband, maybe your child, who's giving you all the information about your changes of your character. However, nothing about the informant is written down in your diagnostic. So you could get all the information from someone who's seeing you maybe once a month or someone who's seeing you daily. Doesn't matter in your description. But when you just think about who's caring the most for people who are suffering from diseases, it's most likely women. And they are picking up the symptoms more quickly than men, and they're describing it more in detail. So what I want to say here is that maybe the clinical rating scale for neurological diseases may be influenced by sex and gender. In a publication which is right now under review, we are looking at the time when you're getting diagnosed with Alzheimer. We found that when you're going to a specialist and you are a man, you get your diagnostic 2 months earlier than women. So what I want to say here is sex and gender difference in duration of the diseases of diagnostic. Okay, so, but what kind of treatment are you getting when you get your diagnosis? So this is a question which we ask our participants, and we found out that a lot of women are more likely to take treatments which are not compared to any medications. They are going for maybe life story work or Ramsden work compared to men. So what I want to say here is sex and gender difference in responding to specific treatments. But now I want to go back to the other case study I want to talk about ME/CFS. So ME/CFS is like a chronic disease, so you have, it may be for a couple of months, for years, or even decades. Maybe ME/CFS is not a disease which you have in mind, but a disease which is really similar to long COVID, and I believe long COVID, everyone heard about it, and everyone had like maybe a feeling what it's about. We spoke before about fatigue. It's not like that you're tired and you can rest and you're okay the next day. It's not like that. So the people who are suffering from the disease are suffering 5 years, 10 years, decades. So I have patients who are having ME/CFS more than 20 years, and I see more patients who are suffering from this disease from the younger age. We're speaking about 7 years old. When we just compare that, we can see that more women are suffering longer from this disease, and we already know that women are more likely to end up in the severe cases of ME/CFS. As I said, there are sex difference in the length of the illness. And I want to spend a little bit more time about the symptoms of ME/CFS. This was a big study from a movement which called Decode ME. They wanted to find a biomarker, and they got huge funding, and they had like over 17,000 of participants in their study. And it was really interesting what they found out. So they asked the participants, in the last 6 months, can you please tell me what kind of symptoms you have really frequently? So they asked about the key symptoms. But we can see here on the right side that the female are associated with the main key symptoms of ME/CFS: fatigue, flu symptoms, sensitive to light and noise, and as well as cognitive disabilities. But the only thing which was really associated to men was only feeling quickly annoyed. Yeah, I was laughing as well about that. So you can see that the prevalence of symptoms may be vary by sex or gender. But this, what I just talked about, is a raw disease which has no biomarker, so maybe it's good to speak about the common disease again, Alzheimer's. So when we're looking there at the symptoms, a study found out that women are more likely to have symptoms like anxiety or delusion, compared to men who have the key symptoms, aggression. So you see there, even in common neurological diseases, the same pattern is coming up. But what we learned about this little exploration is that there could be difference in the trigger, sex difference in the trigger of diseases. There could be difference in the number of individuals who are living with the disease. There could be difference in symptoms, difference in the severity of the disease, difference in the length of the disease, as well as difference in responding to specific treatments. So in my mind, or I believe the difference exists. But we still don't know the underlying cause. Maybe it's sex, maybe it's like all the biological factors we heard before, the definition of sex, or maybe it's gender or your sociological factors. Or maybe it's even both, but what is the actual reason for that? Honestly, we don't know. So let's have a look why we don't know. So as you can see, we know there is a gap there in neuroscience. And when we look at this graphic from 2009, you can see here that in neuroscience, the participants were female and both, like female and male in one study, or only male in one neurological study. But what is the reason for that? So in 1977, till then was a law that you can't take in females or even like, I don't know how to say it perfectly, but maybe ethnicity, which was at that time not so important. But it changed. So 30 years later, women were allowed to be as a participant in diseases, and in 2009, sex was as a biological variable. So that means you are taking, or you have to take in female and male in your study as participants. You will think, okay, this is perfect, we are changing it now. Amazing. I mean, yes, but that brings one problem with us. So when you want to study maybe what influence has pregnancy, what influence has menopause, what influence has your hormonal cycle with diseases, we can see in ME/CFS has huge influence on it. But it's really difficult to study this because you don't want to have men in your study because they can't get pregnant, as far as I know. Okay, so we have a lot of knowledge from old studies which are really important, but they studied, as we know from the history, only men. But we can't just say, okay, it is same for women. We need to ask this question, we need to see what is going on there, so we have to replicate these studies to really know is it the same thing for women or not. As well, we can do the sex differences and look, okay, is it the same for female or male? But we should also look, is there a difference within the sex? So we are looking at intersex differences and intersex differences. Okay, now we spoke about the participants, but let's have a look at the researchers who are doing all this amazing work. So we see in neuroscience, as already Lizzie said here, that we have a lot of male in neuroscience, but less female. And you could say maybe a lot of women are not interested in this field. Okay, fair enough, I take this. But what is with the funding? As Lizzie already said, and we see it here over the years, the funding for female neuroscientists is lower compared to men. But what is our actual aim? What do we want? So I want to quote Dr. Antonella, who is one of the founders from Women's Brain Foundation. She said, from patient's difference to patient characters to achieve precision medicine and to have a precise healthcare system. So as you already know, it's a long movement, a long way to go, and we don't go it alone. We have here the fantastic women in neuroscience in UK. We have the Brain Foundation, and we have other organizations as well who are doing the same movement with us. But what I really want to say here, when we talk about all the women here and the men are feeling underrepresented, it's not the truth. We are looking at the sex differences. We want to help you as well. We want to say, okay, men are suffering from these symptoms because of your structure of the brain, maybe because of your biological factors, maybe because of the gender, which is different to women. I just want to give you this on the way, and thank you so much for your attention.
Amazing. Any questions for Ella? Yeah, please.
Yes.
So you mentioned about the differences in reported symptoms from these diseases, and I'm wondering, I guess you kind of alluded to not being sure about the sex versus gender effect, but do you think women are better at reporting certain symptoms or better at putting language or recognizing certain symptoms around things like anxiety or things like that?
Yes, so there are statistics that the women are more confident talking about anxiety or depression. But what you also hear when a woman is going to a doctor and is explaining what's happening with ME/CFS, for example, they are just saying, like a lot of them, it's in your head, it's hormones, don't be like this. You have still this stigma there. And I think for men to have to come up with this and saying, oh, I have these feelings as well, it's really difficult for them. So I would say to get a diagnostic for men in ME/CFS is maybe, in my eyes, because of my experience, really difficult for them as well. I don't know if it's answered your question.
Fantastic, thank you. So before we wrap up, we've got a few Mentimeter questions for you all, so don't run away quite yet. Hopefully we can switch to that now, if that's all right. Thank you, Ella. Fab, we're just switching to those questions now. Amazing, thank you so much. Oh. Can you press the start button? Is that all right? Oh, has it got the QR code on there? Need to come back, okay. Sorry everyone.
You can also use the code at the top if that helps.
Fab, hopefully you can all access that. It'd be really interesting to hear what you thought of the session. Fabulous. I think we've got a few more questions as well, if it will change. Sorry, excuse me. She's not listening. Hello. Sorry, can you change the slide for me? Thank you. Is it not liking that one? That'll do, we can have that question, sure. Oh, maybe we can't. Can they still see it? Okay. As long as you guys can see it on your phones, that's fine. Let me know if it's not working. But yeah, we'd love to hear what you'd like to see from us next, because as you've heard from this session, there is a huge amount to do across supporting women in research as well as women's health topics. So hopefully you're able to answer those questions. Fab.